This morning at LaGuardia Airport about 11:05 a.m., Flight 1068 from Atlanta to LaGuardia veered off runway 13. This particular runway had been plowed shortly before the incident, and pilots on other planes reported good braking action. I think the pilot did everything he could to slow the aircraft down. Obviously, the pilot and the co-pilot's good efforts were reflected in the fact that there were only minor injuries.
New York, New Jersey Port Authority Executive Director Pat Foy at a press conference detailing the events at LaGuardia Airport in New York yesterday as wintry weather causes Delta Flight 1086 to veer off the runway. Turns out snow was not the only thing causing aviation troubles, as there was a crash involving someone we see on the silver screen out in sunny Santa Monica, California. Let's call in my old congressional colleague, Michael Patrick Flanagan, Skyping in from Washington. So, Mike, you know, one thing about serving in Congress, we were back and forth to our respective districts all the time, spent a lot of time on planes, and I would imagine what they encountered at LaGuardia yesterday, you were used to going into either O'Hare or Midway as you'd fly back home to Chicago from Capitol Hill.
Yeah, if O'Hare is clogged constantly, and it has weather to deal with 6-8 months of the year, to be sure.
Well, mindful of that and the part that weather plays in this, and the part also of pilot expertise in these situations, let's welcome in via telephone aviation expert Todd Curtis. We now understand we have him Skyping in. That's been corrected. He Skypes in from a snowy Brookline, Massachusetts. It is so good to have you back with us, Todd. Let's begin at LaGuardia. We heard Pat Foy praise the work of the crew, those on the flight deck. How tough is it with a freezing runway in those snowy conditions to do what that pilot did yesterday at LaGuardia?
Well, under normal circumstances, even though there might be some lack of traction due to snow and ice on the ground, the procedures at airports and with the airlines are such that they should be able to land safely in a situation like that. However, that said, once a skid does start to occur, once there is a loss of control and it looks like the aircraft is going to leave the runway, then the pilot's work is cut out for him or her. They really have to focus on making sure the airplane ends up in a place that's as safe as possible. And of course, yesterday, although it looks rather dramatic, everybody did get out okay, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, these accidents are very, very rare when you consider the number of takeoffs and landings every hour, every day from LaGuardia, O'Hare, Pittsburgh, Detroit, other places that are very cold dealing with weather. Isn't that so?
That's correct. But again, LaGuardia is a particularly challenging airport compared to most other major airports in the U.S. in that both of its runways are very close to the water. And the runways are relatively short compared to major airports like JFK or Reagan, even Reagan National Airport.
Well, as always, we want to hear from the passengers. Here's the perspective of one of them aboard that Delta flight yesterday.
I'm not even really sure what went through my mind, because you don't even realize it's happening when it's happening, right? And then it wasn't until the plane came to a stop that all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, we just skidded off a runway. I mean, it was just, you know, it's kind of a surreal experience. Even when we were bouncing through the grass and skidding off the runway, nobody was screaming, nobody was really freaking out. And when we came to a dead stop, people were actually really calm.
Mindful of that, I guess it goes to show, Todd, that when they're going through those safety procedures at the start of the flight, passengers need to listen.
Well, absolutely. And although the flight crew and the cabin crew are expertly trained to deal with any emergency, in most cases when something does happen, especially when there's no advance warning of it, it's up to the individual passengers to do what they think is right and sensible in that situation. And it looks like that's exactly what happened yesterday in New York.
Is there a mandatory retirement age for pilots? And I ask that thinking about 72-year-old Harrison Ford flying a plane as old as he is in California.
There are different rules for different kinds of flying. When it comes to airline flying with passengers, there's a retirement age, and it was raised recently. I believe it's up to 65 now. And for cargo operations, there will be another set of rules. But for private aviation, much like what Harrison Ford was doing yesterday, there is no upper age limit. It's just a question of, is the pilot able to pass his or her medical physical exam, which has to be done every couple of years? And is the pilot competent to fly? That is, have they demonstrated any lack of ability, hand-eye coordination, etc., that would ground that pilot? And again, in the case of Harrison Ford, the investigation is at its preliminary stages. It's unclear whether or not the capability of the pilot had anything to do with yesterday's accident.
Well, mindful of that, let's go back and listen. We've all heard Harrison Ford in dramatic situations on the silver screen. Here's the real-life exchange between the small plane and the air traffic controller at Santa Monica Airport in California.
53178, engine failure, immediate return.
Ryan 178, runway 21, clear to land.
Go to 3.
Ryan 178, runway 3, clear to land.
Now, as Mike mentioned, Todd, I think the big surprise, we were all happy to hear that as Ford's son Ben tweeted out, his dad is battered but okay. The whole thing about a guy age 72 but well-versed in flying making that emergency landing on that golf course. I know it's at the preliminary stages, but it appears very impressive what Harrison Ford was able to do.
It's quite impressive in that Santa Monica Airport is in a residential and commercial area, very, very packed with houses and buildings and such. And in fact, that golf course, which is just off of the end of one of the runways, is one of the few open spaces close to the airport. So it looks like Harrison Ford picked the right place to land, landed it on a fairway of a golf course, where even if he had botched the landing and crashed the aircraft, he would not have put any of the residents in the area at any risk. So good decision-making all around.
That's good news. In Chicago, we used to have something called Meigs Field, which was an island off the coast of the Loop, if you will, in Lake Michigan, which Mayor Daley closed and turned into a park. That was a commuter airport that was used for people who had private aircraft in Chicago. Something like that was always close to the water, but there were never any safety issues. Are you acquainted with the Meigs Field issue? Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Or maybe how it relates to Santa Monica. There's going to be pressure to close that down. 30 seconds, Todd.
Well, there's been pressure to close down Santa Monica for several decades now. And in fact, across the U.S., there are a number of smaller airports, especially those that are close to the urban areas, where the question is there an economic, a financial, or public safety issue that has to be considered as to whether this should be closed or kept open? And this debate will continue at Santa Monica.
And it will continue definitely in the light of this crash landing by Harrison Ford, but a happy ending to the story and perhaps developing story out of this as we continue to debate public transportation and private aviation. Todd Curtis, you have our thanks. Michael Flanagan will return, and Miranda Kahn's got our update right now.